We are creating a Who's That Pokemon quiz game. This is a beginner-friendly tutorial and we will be using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to create this game. The game starts by giving us a picture of a random Pokemon from the first 151 Pokemon. We have 4 options to answer from, with a nice hover effect and different color feedback for correct and wrong answers. This is a mobile-first design, but it's styled to look great across screen sizes. You don't need to have touched HTML, CSS, or JavaScript before this video, but I do recommend before starting this video that you have some basic knowledge in them, especially JavaScript functions, data types, and variables. We will be learning about HTML syntax and structure, flexbox and CSS variables, functions, and asynchronous JavaScript. We'll learn how to work with an API, how to fetch and display data from an API. In this case, it will be the RESTful PokéAPI, and we'll learn some simple game logic like defining correct and incorrect answers, loading screens, and keeping track of scores. The tools we'll be using for this project is VS Code as our code editor, Google Fonts for custom fonts, and Netlify for deploying and hosting our website. If you are ready to build the best Pokemon quiz on the internet, then let's get started. As always, you can find the finished code for this project in the description below, together with all the other sources. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to go down to the description of this video and you're going to click the link to the repo, and you are going to find the finished code here. We're going to click this big green button. We're going to download the zip. Once that is downloaded, you're going to find the folder and extract that, and you're going to see all the code for the finished project. We're going to use the images here and just drag that into our new project that we're making. So I'm just going to create a new folder on my desktop here, and I am going to call it Pokemon Quiz Game for simplicity. Then I am opening VS Code, which you can find below in the description if you don't already have that, which is my code editor. I'm going to open a new window here. As you can see in the Explorer, it is completely empty. I am going to drag that folder into the Explorer, and now we are working within that folder in VS Code. So close that welcome message. Let's find our download folder again. So that's the zip we just downloaded. We're going to drag the favicon inside. That's the favicon for the browser. We are going to drag the loading icon, which is just a GIF that is showing the loading screen. And we're going to drag the README, because why not? It's a nice README. Then we are good to go. And then you can, of course, always reference the other files to see any changes between what is in the repo and what you are creating yourself. It's a great way to check for bugs. So let's close these for now. Let's create our first file, which is the index.html file, which is going to be where all our HTML elements live. We're going to also start by exclamation mark, hit enter, and that gives us a boilerplate HTML template. So the first thing we are going to do, and of course all this template is just standard stuff, basically making it look good across different screen sizes. You don't have to worry too much about this meta stuff here. The characters we're using are standard characters, and this makes the screen show up correctly across different browsers and screen sizes and devices. That's pretty much what this does. And the HTML is written in English. And this is, of course, the HTML element. Everything lives within there, and we are going to be mostly concerned with adding things to the body of the HTML. But first off, we're going to give this a new title. We're going to give it the title of Who's, like so, that Pokemon, ? We're going to save that, and then we're going to hit go live down here. If you don't have that installed, that is a live server in our extensions here in VS Code. You're going to hit search for live server, and that's going to be the one that shows up at the start here, and that has 43 million views. You're going to here it says disable, but it's going to say install for you. We're going to install that, and that's going to give you the ability to run our code live on our browsers. So let's hit that now. And as we can see, we have our browser going live with the title here updated. Who's that Pokemon seeing up top here? So that means we are successfully running our HTML. Another neat extension you might want is Prettier, which I use to code format my code so that all the indentations and spacing looks pretty good. You can consider downloading that, and you can find the link below in the description as well. That's the two extensions I'm using in this tutorial. Now we have our code editor on our left and our browser on our right. If you go up here in View and you hit Word Wrap, as you can see on Mac, it's Option Z. That's gonna make all the code be visible on your screen, on the VS Code screen, regardless of how wide it is. So now we're ready to go. The first thing we are going to do, we are going to link up our style sheet, link, and then hit tab, and that's going to give us a relationship style sheet, which is correct. We are linking to a style sheet. We haven't created it yet, but it's going to be called styles.css. So let's just create that right now in the Explorer, new file, styles.css. Of course, this is where all our styling is going to live. Let's just target the body to test and give it a background color of red. Hit save, and we see that it's successfully they're synced up and linked. So let's remove that again, and then let's also create our script.js file for our JavaScript. Let's just console log here, test, and then let's also link that up in our HTML script, and that's going to have a source of the name we just said, script.js, and let's not forget to add the defer attribute so that the JavaScript runs first when all the HTML has been read, because otherwise we will be targeting HTML elements down here that aren't existing yet when the JavaScript code runs, and that's going to create bugs. So let's now go to the browser, hit inspect, open our console, and here we can see that test is running. Therefore, both our style sheet and our JavaScript is connected. Great, let's also remove that, save, and we see that test is gone. Back in our HTML, we also want to add our favicon. As we can see here, it's just this like globe standard icon in Google Chrome. So we're gonna add another link. We are gonna say favicon, and then we are gonna leave everything as standard. We are gonna target our favicon.png, hit save, and then we see that the favicon has been updated. Perfect. Actually, this shortcut icon is a bit redundant. We can also just remove the shortcut, leave icon. It's a bit of a remnant from how it was used to be written in the past, but we can leave icon and it works just fine. Now we're ready to move on to the body, the actual stuff on the web page. So let's create a div in the body. We are going to give it a class that we're going to use to target the styling later of container, because that's going to contain pretty much everything. We are going to create an h4, which is our heading of the fourth size, so not the largest one, but the fourth largest one. And inside here, actually it's not going to say result, it's going to say who's that Pokemon ? And if you remember when I was showing the quiz, that's the main text at the top before we start answering questions. We are also going to have an ID here in this h4 called result, because that's going to be what we target in our JavaScript to actually manipulate this h4. In addition to that, we're going to give it a class to separate the targeting of the JavaScript and the targeting of the CSS styling. So the IDs are for the JavaScript and the classes are for the styling. Next up, we are going to add our image, and it is going to be having, let's see, it's going to have an ID of Pokemon image, capital I. That's called camel casing when you're starting with a lowercase first word, uppercase second word. And then the alt is going to be called Pokemon image. As we can see, it's not loading anything because it doesn't really exist. So now we are actually done with this image in the HTML, but of course nothing is showing up, and that's not really what we want. We are lacking a source attribute here that is linking, to an image, for example, the favicon, and that would show the image here. But we are not saving our images for all the Pokemon in our actual project here, because they are living in the API. So here I am now in the PokéAPI. As we can see, we have a lot of, we can check out the docs here. We have very good documentation if you want to learn the details of how to use different endpoints in the API, also using different code, using Java, using Kotlin, Python, whatever you want. We are just going to keep it very simple. And for now especially, we just want a link to an image of a Pokemon so that we can use it to style in our style sheet later before we move on to JavaScript and actually add our own images that we've fetched. But for now, we just want a dummy image, So let's just click this Pokemon Ditto. So to break this down, this is the URL for this API endpoint. We have the PokéAPI.com, that's fine. Then it's the API. Then it's the second version of the API. Then it's all Pokemon, and then it's Ditto specifically. And then if we right-click, hit inspect, we go to our network tab here, and let's hit refresh. We see that we have Ditto here. It's a bit big. We see that we have Ditto here. If we click here, we see that this is the preview of everything that we are getting from the API. This is all the data. And for the PokéAPI, the images, we're going to go more in detail later about this when we're doing the JavaScript. But for now, let's just scroll down and find the sprites section. And that is basically what, also let me full screen this to make it easier for you to see. The sprites are basically the images for the Pokemon. So right now, let's just copy paste one of these. We're using in the other, and then in the Dream World section, let's just basically target this whole thing, copy that, and then let's move back to our HTML. And then just paste that in for the source here. Hit save, and then we see back in our game that Ditto has turned up. So we can close the PokéAPI for now. We're going to get back to it later. But that's basically what we wanted. We want something to just show while we are building our style. As we can see, it's also formatting the image element with the Prettier extension, making these all be under each other on each line. Under the image, we are going to add a div, and this is going to be, it's going to have an ID of options. That's going to be our buttons. And it's going to have a class of options container. And then inside of here, again, we don't actually need to add something here. We're just doing it for the style purposes now because we're going to be adding the buttons dynamically with the JavaScript. So now we're going to add one button, and let's just say Dodrio. And if you hold Shift Alt down or Shift Option on Mac down, you get to copy the line. We're going to have 4 buttons. Let's say Voltorb here. Let's say Mr. Mime. And also Nidorino. Let's say. So now we have our main Pokemon, and then we have also one of them should be the correct one. So this one is Ditto, like so. Now we have a correct answer, and we have 3 incorrect answers. Let's increase the size of the screen. My screen is quite big, so that's why I'm increasing it, but you might not need to on your own screen. Then under the options div, we're going to add another h4. This is going to be with an ID of points, which is going to hold the points that we have scored so far. So here we're going to write points, colon, and then space, and then span, and then hit tab. And then we're going to create an ID with points value. And then inside of the span, we're just going to write 0 for now. That's going to create this nice display here. And then after this span, a slash. And then we're going to create a new span. Let's see. New span. Inside of that span, we're going to have an ID of total count. And inside of there, it's going to say 0. So points 0 out of 0, that's going to be our starting HTML for the point system. And then after the div, under the h4, after the div, we're going to create another div, and that's going to be our last element here. ID loading container class loading container, and it's going to have an image with an ID of loading. Let's see, loading icon, and we're going to link in the source to our loading GIF. As you can see, it's loading. And the alt is just going to say loading ... Perfect. So that is all for our HTML. We have all the elements we need to start styling our game. Let's move on to our style sheet. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to open fonts.google.com. We are going to search for the Rametto with 2 M's and 2 T's. And then it's this Rametto 1. We're going to click that. That's going to be our header in our game. And we are going to just select regular 400. That's the only one we need. We are going to choose the import here. We're going to copy that. And we are going to go to our styles, paste that, and just remove these styles element tags like so. And then in order to see all the code nicely folded, we go to View, Word Wrap, and then we hit Save. And now we have Rametto 1 readily available in our code. We can close Google Fonts. And then on line 3, we're going to target our root. We are going to add a couple of variables here, CSS variables, that we're going to be using to avoid reusing a lot of color codes. So we're going to just define them once, and then we can reference the actual variable name instead, so that if we want to change these colors, we can just do it in one place. But then everywhere we've used the variable name, we'll change with it. So the first one is going to be FFF, that's just white, and then we're going to define the button correct color, correct. That is going to be hashtag 5AAE76, and then it's going to be button wrong. That is going to be hashtag E13E3E. Then it's button hover. That is going to be hashtag AAA. So we're not using these variables yet. That's why nothing is changing, obviously. But soon we will. Next, we're going to target the body. We're going to go into display, and we're going to display things using flexbox, which you see reorders things, makes them align on a row instead of in a column. We are going to align items in the center. We are also going to justify the content to the center. We are also going to text align center. We're also going to display, let's see, flex direction column, like so. If you want a detailed breakdown on flexbox, I have a separate video which you can check out here on that. We're going to set the minimum height of 100 view height. We are going to add margin 0 to remove the inbuilt margins, those orange corners here around an element. Then we are going to also choose the font family. We are going to say you are going to be Poppins and sans serif. Let's zoom out here because it's very big now, like so. Then we are going to give a background of linear gradient to get that nice blue and red background. We are going to give 135 degrees to it. It's going to be starting from 3B4 CCA at 0% to hashtag FF3535 at 100%. So what is going on here? If I close the inspect, we're starting from the top, 0% from the left, 100% all the way to the right. And the degrees here decide in which direction. So 135 degrees is saying that we're going to go from the top left to the bottom right. If I say 0 degrees, it would change to that. 45, like so. 90, we are going from left to right. So you're basically changing the starting positions. 180, top top right to bottom left. So you can see you have a lot of control how you want to display this. I like 135 degrees, but you're free to choose whichever you want. Then we're going to change the color of the actual text from black to white using our variable. And we're going to choose white color. There we go. And now, as I mentioned, if we now want to change this to a different color, we can change it in one place, and then it would change across the app, wherever we've used that variable. Now we're going to target the header, which is our text here. We are going to say margin 0 to fully control the spacing. We're going to say font family. We're going to choose this new Repo one that we had downloaded. And then if that fails, we're just going to use a sans serif font. But it is loading just fine. If we inspect, font family Repo 1. Perfect. Then we're going to choose the font size. That is going to be 24 pixels. The font weight is going to be 400. And then the height is going to be 100 pixels, like so. Then we are going to be targeting the Pokemon image. We are going to be giving it a height of 200 pixels and a max width of 100%. So a max width of 100% of what? Of its parent container. So if we go and inspect here, If I change it to, let's say, 90, let's see, with the screen a bit smaller, or let's say 60, we see that it decreases. So 100% of its parent container. Let me also just decrease our VS Code a bit so we can see our app a bit better, like so. Then we are going to target the options container. Options container class. We're going to say display flex and flex wrap. This is basically flexing this whole options container here, making it a flexbox. Now they align on a row. Now we're going to target the buttons to make them actually look good. Button. And we're going to say, well, you're going to have a height of 52 pixels. You are going to have margins all around you of 10 pixels, like so. As we can see, they're starting to align a bit better. They're still not a good width. So the width, we're going to say, we're going to actually use the calculator function here in CSS, which is fully allowed. You're going to be 50% of your width, of the max width, minus 20 pixels. Nothing happened there. Why did nothing happen? Let's see. We need the space here. There we go. We need the space between the minus, like so. And now we can see that they have margins, 10 around them each, and then they are flexing as well and flex wrapping in the available options container. Then we are gonna go and give them a new font family. This is gonna be Poppins. And if that fails, the failback is sans serif, like so. We're gonna give it a font weight of 700, make them a bit thicker. We are gonna give them a font size of 17 pixels, also make it bigger. And we're gonna text transform it to capitalize the text, like so. Then we're gonna give it a cursor pointer whenever we hover over this button, like so, giving it a more visual appeal that this is a button that you can click on. We're going to give it a background color using our variables again, white color. Instead of gray, now they're white. And then we're going to give them a border of none, remove this old school border, and we're going to give it a border radius to round out the edges a bit. You can make it more modern, 5 pixels. And there we go. So we're still lacking the on hover color. Let's add that button and then colon hover, like so. When we hover, we want to change the background color to use instead the button hover, like so. Then we see that we are getting the correct button hover, but we also want to change the color of the text to var, and that's going to be white color, like so. Great. Then we want to add the button.correct. So when we are actually have the correct button, when we've answered correct, we're going to add this class, this correct class, to the button. And then we're going to change the background color to variable correct, button correct, as well the color to variable white color. And then let's copy paste this. And then we're going to say wrong. Then it's going to be button wrong, like so. Then let's make this huge loading circle smaller. We're going to target the loading container We're going to give it a height of 500 pixels. We are going to target the loading icon, capital I, like so. I'm going to give it a width of 200 pixels, height of 200 pixels, position of relative within its container, and then top of 20% within its container. So if we go to the loading, that container is going to take the position of the rest of the content when the other content is not shown, and the loading screen is going to be shown instead. Otherwise, we're going to hide the loading screen. Now let's target the points. We're going to give them a margin of 0, font size of 24 pixels, font weight of 700, text align of center. Like so. Are we... I see that we are not adding any styling here. If we check in our index, we have forgotten indeed to add the S here. Let's add that. Points. There we go. The container does not seem to be styled. We have also forgotten to style the container, I see. If we scroll back up between the body and the header, let's target the container and give it a max width of 300 pixels. That's why the width of ditto was not changing very accurately. Flex direction of column, like so, and then let's give it a gap of 50 pixels. Container, what is going on? Let's give it a display of flex, like so. And now our game is starting to look good. If we now just hide this loading screen for now, if we go down, we find the loading container, we give it a display of none, we see that our game is looking very good. Non-functional, but very good. That is all for our styles as well. Let's delete that again, that line here. Bring the loading container back for now. And let's move on to the script file. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to get the DOM elements. Because in JavaScript, in HTML, sorry, we have all these elements. But in order to manipulate them in JavaScript, we actually have to reference them. So we have to create kind of JavaScript mirror images of the HTML elements in order to do what we want. Like, for example, changing the header text here to correct answer or wrong answer. So let's see how we do that. We first define a constant for this element, because this element is not going to change. The content of it might change, but the element itself is staying the same. It's staying constant. So const result element equals document get element by ID, and it has the name of result. If we go into the container, we see that the ID is called result. Like so. Let's also try to log that. Shorthand, if you write log and tab, you get the console log. Now let's log the result element we just saw. If we go to our console here, we see that it has correctly targeted it, created the result element from it, and now we are printing it here in the console. Perfect. So we are just going to be repeating that syntax for a couple of elements. So let's Control Shift or Option Shift, depending on your platform, and hit down. And we get to repeat that code. Next one is going to be Pokemon image element. And of course, that's going to target the image element. What is that called? Pokemon image. Pokemon image, like so. Next one is going to be options container, neatly called options, like so. Then the fourth one is going to be points element, and that is going to be points value that we can see here. That's the first one. Then we are going to copy it 3 more times. 1, 2, 3. Next one is going to be total count. And that is also total count. Main container. And that is simply container. And then we have loading container, which is going to be loading container. Like so. That is all our DOM elements that we need in this project. Awesome. Now it's the trickiest part of this tutorial, and that is the asynchronous part, which can be very hard to wrap your head around when you're starting around with JavaScript, because normally when you're writing things from top to bottom, or you have things within functions and you call another function, things are very sequential. You run one thing after the other. But the main problem with fetching things with an API, for example, is that it takes a little time. Even if it's like a couple of microseconds, it takes a little time for your request to go to the API. Let's see if I can draw that. So, here we are with our app. And when we are making a request to the API, we are saying, hey, give me something. That's the request. But then between that, it takes a little time. So here it's like loading, if that's the loading sign in the API. It takes a little time both for that request, which is another time it takes. It takes a little time to send for the internet, to actually send from our place to the API, wherever that is stored. Then the API needs to process that. And then also we need to send that request, send the answer back. So we've requested something, we get a response, and that is also going to take a little time to actually reach us. So compared to when we're just running code, let's see, I'm not really familiar with using this Draw.io. When we're running code just by ourselves on our computer, everything is fine. We're just running here, everything is sequential. We run line 1 and then line 2 after that, line 3 after that. Things are running pretty orderly, and we don't have to worry about waiting, for some things to be finished before moving on to the next step, because the next line is naturally gonna just run after the previous line has been completed. But here, imagine if we are now on line, let's say line 10 here. If we are on line 10, we send the request, but now we've sent it. And now we move on to line 11, but the API hasn't been able to respond yet. The API hasn't managed to take our request and send a response back, and we haven't managed to actually package out that response before we have moved on to line 11, line 12, line 13, and now that's basically the thing that it causes an error if we try to fetch things from an API without using asynchronous functionality. I've really thought about how to explain async in the simplest way I can, and pretty much I think this is a good representation. And don't overthink the phrases and keywords we're simply using. Think of them just as tools, but think of it basically as this. If we are sending a request to somewhere, we are wanting to get info, data from somewhere, and we need to get something back, then we're going to use async functionality, because there's a little time delay there that we need to count for. And everything, all those fancy keywords we're going to be using now is simply saying, wait until you have some data, like we're telling the JavaScript, don't go to the next line until you have some data actually back from wherever we have asked it. So keep that in mind when we are starting to code now. So we can close that. Now let's get back to our code. We are going to create our first async function. So we're going to create a function to fetch one Pokemon with an ID. That is a great use of the PokéAPI. And if we open the PokéAPI.co, we see that that's what this is doing here. We are fetching a Pokemon with an ID or a name, but we can also say to here, submit, and then we get Ivysaur. You see here, we're using the same function that we're just going to create now in our code. If we go to 1, submit Bulbasaur. If we go into 100, submit Voltorb. If we go to 1087, I'm not familiar with the ones pretty much after 150. Maybe it doesn't exist. 134, Vaporeon. There we go. If we go to 45, Vileplume. Great. 14, Kakuna. So by changing the ID, we get different results in the API. So that's the function that we have here that we are going to create locally on our machine in our project. So the way we do that, the way we define an async function is we say, normally we write function and then name of the function, and then, maybe it takes some arguments here, arg1, arg2, arg3, and then we can, do some logic in here. We can use the argument, arg1 plus arg2 equals blah, 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 That's how a normal function is set up. Here we are going to take, for an argument, of course, we're going to take an ID, because we want to be able to use this function here to send an ID in order to get one specific Pokemon. We don't want to get, if we exclude this, I think we just get a list of Pokemon. Yeah, Pokemon, and then by default you get 20 Pokemon. So we don't want that, we want to actually get one specific Pokemon. So we need to include an ID, and that's why we're using this. We also want to give it a good name, so we're going to call it fetch Pokemon by ID, and then we could start writing the function out, but we need to add this async keyword before. And that is telling JavaScript that this function here, something after the async, that's going to be async. It's going to need to use async functionality, so that is going to let us use something called await. And await is the secret sauce here, basically saying await for us to get some data when we run whatever we run here before you go to the next line. And that is essentially what async functionality is, what an async function is. So it's not more advanced than that, but when you first see this syntax, it can be very confusing. So let's create a constant here. We're going to call that our response. And the response is going to be, if you remember when I was drawing the illustration, we are asking the API for something, that's a request, and then the API is sending back a response. So we are going to say, we're going to await a response from calling fetch, which is the keyword to basically go into an API and request something from a URL. And we are just going to copy paste this whole code, copy that. Let's just paste that in there. And also let's make this a bit bigger so we can see what's going on. I'm actually going to full screen for now, like so. So we are going into the PokéAPI correctly. We're going into the version 2 of the API. We're going into Pokemon. And then we are fetching the first Pokemon. That's great. Let's just test that for now. And then we are going to create another const. We're going to call that data. Data is going to be equal to await response.json. And the thing that we are doing here, response is saved as this request. So we're fetching a request. We are adding the await keyword to say wait until you actually get here to define what response is. Because if we excluded that, we would say response is equal to this request. But then response would be immediately added, and the request would turn out to be like, well, an error or unknown, undefined.
because we haven't received anything yet. By putting the await, response is fully defined as the answer. And then we are transforming the response here. We're saying the const data is await of the response. Again, adding the await keyword to await for a response to be done. And then we're saying take response and turn it into JSON format. And JSON format is basically what we see here in the API. View raw JSON. That's this. That's raw JSON. So if I copy this link, I put it into the browser, that's JSON format. If I click raw, that is actually what JSON looks like. So it's not pretty, but it is very efficient of sending information. And basically here you have the API. That's what the API essentially is. A bunch of JSON data on some URL. When you're learning about APIs, it sounds very complicated, but ultimately it's just a bunch of letters and strings on a URL. That's it. So back to our code. We are turning this response into a JSON format so that we can read it properly. And then we are simply returning the data. The function, that's what the function does. You give it an ID and then it returns the data for that Pokemon with that ID. As you can see here, we are currently not using this ID, so let's just leave that for now, or we can just delete it for now, because I want to show you what it looks like when we have the ID hard-coded here. Now, let's create and this was step 2, by the way. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a test function to see result of step 2, to actually see what this async function is doing, you know. So we are going to call another async function, test fetch, and we are simply saying const Pokemon equals await fetch Pokemon by ID, like so, and then we want to console log the Pokemon. So what's going on here? Well, in the fetch Pokemon by ID, we are going in and fetching the Pokemon with an ID of 1. That's Bulbasaur, I believe. Then we are setting that response that we are receiving and awaiting to data, and then we are returning that data. So wherever we call that fetch Pokemon by ID, that data is going to pop up. So in this new async function, test function, we are setting that Pokemon constant to be awaiting that async function, which is that data that is going to come back to us. So ultimately, we should be receiving some data in the form of Pokemon, that is data that is going to be console logged here. So let's call that test fetch function and see if everything works. That is going to be our 4th step. Call test function. And we go back to our project. We see if I save, it keeps reloading because of live reload. We go to the console, and lo and behold, we have something in our console log here. And that is basically the data. That is what we have fetched from the Pokemon API. As you can see, it has, if we go to the network tab, we can, and click this here. Let's run it again. We see that we are getting number 1 here. That is the response for Bulbasaur. As we can see, you can see name, Bulbasaur, URL, that's the URL. You can see like all the info basically on Bulbasaur that the PokéAPI has. Name here, Bulbasaur. Order, it's number 1. It's a species of Bulbasaur. Here's all the images we have of Bulbasaur, all its stats, all the types of it, etc., etc. Basically all the data for Bulbasaur we are receiving now. Now let's see if we change in our code the number 1 to number 2. We see that the network here request, also you see that there is a request. Let me make this bigger. Here we see status code 200 OK. status 304 not modified. So if you have a 200, that usually means that that's going to be everything went as intended. And this is the preview of the data, and this is the actual response. The preview is usually easier to work with because you can kind of collapse the data. And then you see the initiator. What is it that actually called this function? And you see the timing. So here is what I was talking about earlier. You sent a request. It lasted for 0 seconds. Great. Then we waited 0.51 milliseconds. And then it took 0.29 milliseconds to download. So totally, it took 1.18 milliseconds, which is nothing, for the human mind, for our perception, but it is a whole lot of time for a computer. And our code, the code we wrote here, would very easily have skipped over those seconds, those milliseconds, and caused an error if we didn't include these await stuff here. Don't stress about it if everything is not super clear to you right now. With repetition, this is also getting easier for you. And ultimately, you just need some time to let this async syntax sink in. But it is a very useful and even crucial part about being a front-end developer, being able to use async functionality when needed, because you do end up using a lot of APIs and sending a lot of data between different places that are hosted in different places. So now we can actually just comment out this. If you hold Control KC, you comment out. We don't need these step 4 and 3 here. It's only for testing. Let's see if we go back to our console. Yeah, it's disappeared. Great. We are moving on to step 5, which is going to be the function to randomize the Pokemon ID. Because if you see here, we still have a hard-coded number here, and we don't actually, we're not sending an ID here. What we want this async function fetch Pokemon by ID to do is actually to take an ID. Otherwise it's a bit pointless. But then how do we use that in here? What we're going to do is we're going to change these quotation marks here, double quotes or single quotes, and we are going to have to write backticks. Because that, essentially without doing anything else, it just means the same thing. It's a way to define a string within JavaScript. But now, because we have backticks, we can also add a neat feature. Let's remove the 2 and let's write $, and then curly brackets, and then you see that this turns blue, the same as the rest of JavaScript. Otherwise, this has the color of a string. And now, because we have added those backticks, we can now add a variable within the string, and it's going to read as a string. So now we can add the ID here. And now if I were to comment out this test function again, we see that we need to add an ID for it. So when we are calling it await fetch Pokemon by ID, let's give it a 1. We're getting a 1 here. Great. Awesome. Bulbasaur. How about 12? Butterfree. So here in the fetch Pokemon by ID, we have the ID parameter. That's the placeholder for whatever we send in. And here, fetch Pokemon by ID, we're calling it, and instead of the placeholder, we're giving it the argument of 12. So basically 12 takes the position of the ID and becomes the ID essentially. And then we are basically now have a function to fetch a specific Pokemon by the ID. Now we though need a way to randomize this instead of just giving it a straight up number every time, because that would be a very boring quiz. So that is why we are creating function 5 to randomize. Let's see, function get random Pokemon ID. And it is not taking any, doesn't have a parameter. We are returning the math inbuilt function in JavaScript, floor, and then we are saying math random times 151, and then we are going to say +1. So what is going on this line? How are we getting a random number here? Well, mathRandom, that's a function that generates a floating point random number. So that's going to be a range from 0 to 1. So basically it can give you a 0 complete, it can give you 0.1, it can give you 0.111, like 2, 3, 4, it can give you 0.9, it can give you 0.999. It is not going to give you 1. Never going to give you 1. So it's going to give you 0 to almost 1, all the way up to 1. That is what this part does. And then multiplying that by 151 makes it so that you can go from 0 to actually 150. All the way up to 150, but not including 151. So that's what this is so far. That's giving you this range of numbers. Then MathFloor rounds down the result of multiplying this to the nearest whole number, ensuring that basically the final result is not something like 1.45. It's always going to be, if it's 1.45, it's going to round down to 1. If it's 76.76, it's going to round down to 76, always. So now we have something that gives us a whole number between 150, 0 and 150, I mean. And then because we need the 151, we're adding the +1 here at the end. And that essentially gives us a random number, random whole number between 1 and 151. And this part, this number 5 here, that is part of our actual utility functions. This part of the functions we're going to be using inside of other functions. So we're just going to define that here, utility functions. And we're going to use a couple of them later as well. Just give a bit of space there. Now let's actually use this getRandom Pokemon ID function instead of this hard-coded fetch Pokemon by ID. So let's call it inside of this function. And then also, let's not forget to add the parentheses, like so. So now, fetch Pokemon by ID takes an ID, but then you get random Pokemon ID, which gives us a random ID. And let's look at the results now. We are getting order 139, 187, sorry, 213. No, that can't be right. ID 131, yeah. And ID 130. Let's zoom in if you can see. ID 113. ID 69. ID 145. So as we can see, we are staying within the range. Number 6, Charizard. Perfect. Now we are fetching a random Pokemon from the API using our amazing JavaScript skills. Let's take back our test function again, comment that out. The next thing we are going to be creating between for and utility functions is number 6. We are going to create a function to load the question with options. And that is also going to be an async function. We're going to call it load question with options. And it's not going to have any parameters. And then we are going to be basically at step 7. We are going to fetch the correct answer first. So here we are going to say let Pokemon ID equal to get random Pokemon ID. We're going to call that function. So now we have a random Pokemon ID set here, if we call that function that is. Then we want a way to check if the current question has already been used or displayed earlier. So if we've already shown Ditto, we don't want to be showing him again, him or her. So we are going to go to the top here, and we are going to create basically step 8. We are going to initialize variables. 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 There we go. And it's going to be, the first one is going to be let used Pokemon IDs, and that is going to be an empty array, like so. And we're going to use that used Pokemon IDs to store all the Pokemon IDs that we have gone through so far, and we're going to be putting them in here, like so. And they're just going to be kept adding up as the quiz is moving on, and that's the way we're going to ensure that we don't reuse that ID. So then when we are in here, that's going to be step 8.2. We are going to check if current question has already been used. So we're going to use the while loop. We're going to use used Pokemon IDs. While used Pokemon IDs includes another built-in method, Pokemon ID. Then we are going to run a function. We are going to say, go into Pokemon ID again and get a new random Pokemon ID. Oops, what happened here? We needed parentheses there and not here, like so. So to explain a bit more what's going on here, if Pokemon IDs, that's the empty array we already made, if Pokemon IDs includes Pokemon ID that we just set, we just called it when we called this function. If it's already there, it means that we've gotten the same random ID twice now. Then we're just basically going to ignore that. We're not going to use that Pokemon ID. We're saying, then let's get a new ID. And while, if that new ID again ends up being something that is inside Pokemon IDs, we're going to just be calling this while loop over and over again until eventually the Pokemon ID we get, the random ID, is going to be one that doesn't exist in the array, and therefore we are sure that when we move on from under this line, we have a unique ID. We're not reusing an old ID. And that's how we ensure that we get unique Pokemons showing up one after the other. Then in step 8.3, we are going to say that if Pokemon has not been displayed yet, it is added to used Pokemon IDs, and it is set as a new const Pokemon. We're going to take used Pokemon IDs, we're going to push into it the Pokemon ID we have now, because it's past the barrier of the while loop, so it means it's unique. And now it goes into the array, and then we're going to set it as const Pokemon equals await fetch Pokemon by ID Pokemon, like so. Pokemon ID, sorry. So now we're loading a question with a Pokemon that hasn't existed in the quiz so far. And then we are going to create an options array. And that is going to be basically const options equals, and we're going to put in the Pokemon.name. Because let's see here, if we now open up our inspect here, actually let's go to the Pokemon API. And let's see, let's just take this here, put it in our URL, inspect, and then in the network. It's the easiest to see. Click on one here. And then we go to the preview. We see the name, Bulbasaur. So whatever we're fetching here, setting, Pokemon will be this whole data here, like all the rows here. It's going to be an array, or actually an object with all of these different data points. So we're going Pokemon, that's the whole array, whole object I mean, and then into the name, which is Bulbasaur in this case. So we're setting const options to the current name of the new unique Pokemon that we have fetched. And then we're going to say const options IDs equals new array Pokemon.id. So that would be the ID 1 for Bulbasaur. Then in step 10, we are going to fetch additional random Pokemon names to use as options. So that is going to be the 3 other ones. So if Bulbasaur is here, we need 3 more to basically fill out the questionnaire. So we're going to do another while loop. So while options dot length is less than 4, we are going to keep this while loop running. That means that this options is currently just 1, so this while loop is going to run now. Then we're going to say let random Pokemon ID equals get random Pokemon ID again. And then we're going to create a new while loop. While options IDs includes random Pokemon ID, we are going to run it again. Random Pokemon ID equals get random Pokemon ID, like so. Don't know why I keep misplacing that parentheses, like so. So what is essentially going on here is, let me comment that as well, 10.1. So we are ensuring that the fetched option does not exist in the options list. So this creates a new random ID until it does not exist in options ID. So the same logic as up here, as long as options includes the new random Pokemon IDs, or options IDs, we are going to fetch a new random ID. Therefore, we're not going to be able to have the same like ditto twice in our boxes here. And then, if it passes this, it means it's unique. Then we're going to say options IDs push, aka put this number inside of the array random Pokemon ID. But we are not done with this while loop. So for step 10.2, we want to be fetching a random Pokemon with the newly made ID and adding it to the options array. So what does that look? Well, we're going to create a new constant, random Pokemon. We're going to use the await keyword, fetch Pokemon by ID. We're going to use the new random Pokemon ID. We're going to create a new const, random option. It's going to be equal to random Pokemon.name. And then we're going to go into the options, push, and then this new random option, like so. Then it's time to test if this all works, I think. So let's go create a new part here, 10.3, test. So we're going to console log options, and then console log options IDs, like so. And we need also to call this, let's see here. We need to actually call the initial load. So load question with options, like so. So we are calling this whole async function here that we have just made. So load question with options. You see when I reload the page, slowpoke, pharaoh, polyrath, mook. So the end result is that after every iteration, we are adding a new random Pokemon, 9, 74, 84, 16. And then we hit the length of 4, and we just exit the while loop. So now we are done with this while loop. We are not yet done with the actual load question with options function. So we're going to continue that. We actually want to shuffle this array because otherwise we're going to get the correct answer on the first place every single time, and that would be boring. It would always be the correct answer in the upper left corner. So for that, we're going to call a shuffle array function here that is going to take the options as a parameter. And now we need to create that in our utility functions here. So that is going to be step 12. We are going to be creating our utility function that is going to shuffle the array we send it. So we're going to say function shuffle array. It's going to take an array, and then how do we shuffle it? Well, we're going to return the array we give it. We're going to use the sort method on it, like so. And then we are going to take the inbuilt math.random and then minus 0.5. So what this does is that the sort method expects basically the callback function to return a value less than 0, equal to 0 or greater than 0. Based on this return value, it determines the sorting order of this array. So if you used math_random directly without subtracting the 0.5, the callback function would generate a value between 0 and 1. And since the sort method expects a comparison, results that can be negative, 0, or positive, the absence of 0 minus 0.5 would lead to basically a biased behavior. So subtracting 0.5, you get a more randomized sort function. So now we are shuffling the array with the options. Great. Then we are ready for step 13, which is we're going to clear any previous value or like result and update Pokemon image to fetched image URL from the sprites. Okay, so we're going to go into the result element that we had defined in the start up here. We are going to go into the text content of it, and we're going to say who's that Pokemon, like so. We are going to go into the Pokemon image element, go into the source attribute. We're going to go and set that to the Pokemon.sprites. So as we can see here, in our network, we are now going into the Pokemon. Then we're moving into sprites. Then we need to go into other. And then we need to go into dream world, dream_world. And then let's see, front default. Into front_default. Save that. Lo and behold, something happened. I save, and Ditto is popping up before we load, but then we are getting a random Pokemon. How cool is that? Let's now remove the Ditto here. Let's see. Let's remove this source here. I'm simply going to copy paste that. I'm going to comment out this part, and I'm going to remove the source here, like so. Then we are getting a random Pokemon before each image, basically. Then we are going to move on to step 14. We are going to create options HTML elements from options array in the DOM. So instead of hard coding these buttons, we are going to create them from this options array we have. So let's remove our buttons or comment them out for now. Then we are going to go into the options container. We're going to go into the inner HTML. We're going to set that to an empty string. That's going to reset if it was set to something else. Then we are going to go into the options. We're going to say for each inbuilt method. We're going to take option and index for each element. That's each button or each name of a Pokemon we have, basically. And then for each of those, we're going to create a button, const button, that is going to be equal to document create element. And we are going to create a button element. This is inbuilt functionality in JavaScript. And then button.text content equals option. And then the button is going to have an on-click. And that is going to take an event, the click event. And then when that happens, we're going to run a check answer function that we don't really have yet. It's going to take an option, but we're just going to leave it at that. And then after that, options container append child button, like so. Boom, we have our 4 random Pokemon. Let's see, and they are Charmander, Paras, Diglett, Pinsir. And we see that we are getting Weeping Bell, bottom left, Snorlax, top right, Bellsprout, top left. They are getting a random position, the correct answer, and the 3 other ones as well. So what happened here in number 14? Well, we went into the options container. That is this one. And we said that the inner HTML, the buttons, basically we remove them with this line. And then we said for options, that's the saved Pokemon names we have previously made. For each of those that are 4, we're going to take the option and we're going to take their index. That's basically where they are. We don't actually need this part here, like so. So we're not using that index argument or parameter. We are then creating a button for each name by using the create element method. We are saying that the text content of that button is going to be the option, which is the name of the Pokemon. We're giving each button a click event, and that's going to fire a check answer function. When I go into the console now, you can see when I click, we get an error because check answer is not defined because we haven't made it yet. And then the options container, we're basically appending. Without this, it's not actually added to the HTML. It's still just like in there somewhere. So we need to append the child to the options container. And then we basically add the buttons back after having removed them first. So now we're going to move on to step 15, which is going to be creating that check answer function. So create check answer function here. And that is going to be called, we already know it, check answer. And it is going to take a parameter called is correct and an event. Like so. So now if I click, let's just like log something here. Console log test. Now if I click a button, we see that we're logging test successfully.
The way this function is going to work is that when we send in this is correct, we're going to actually compare inside here. When we click, we're going to compare the option, and that's the button we click. It's going to vary. And if that is triple equals to Pokemon, which is our correct option, dot name, because Pokemon, if we control an F here, then we see, let's see here, Pokemon name, const Pokemon, that's our initial correct answer. So Pokemon name is the correct answer's name, and if that is equal to the option here, and option is button text, then it means we've clicked the correct answer. So this is going to equate to true. So is correct, if we click the right button, is going to be true, and is correct is going to be false if we click the wrong button. And in addition to that, we're going to send in the event, which is the event here. So we're just going to say comma event, and that's the button click. Then instead of test console log here, we are gonna define a const selected button, and that is gonna be equal to document query selector, and we are gonna target selected, because we're going to be adding this selected class later in the check answer button to whichever button we have clicked. So what this step does, 15.1, is it checks if any button is already selected. If falsy, then no element, which means it returns null. So if there is no element that has the selected class, which currently is the case, then this is just going to be equal to false or null, and that's going to be very useful. So if selected button is not falsy, if we basically say if selected button, it means that if true is basically what this says. If this returns true or truthy, then we are going to return, because that means that if already a button is selected, do nothing, and we're going to exit the function. Basically, we can't click a button again. And at this point, let's scroll up. We're going to need to initialize another variable here, and we are going to call it let count, and that is going to be equals to 0 in the start.
And then let's scroll down again. In 15.4, also this was strictly 15.3. In 15.4, we are going to, so if the selected button is truthy, we're going to return. If it's falsy, if nothing exists with the selected button currently, then we're going to run this code. We are going to mark the clicked button as selected and add the class, and we're going to increase the count by 1. So we're going to go into event. That's the thing we sent in. That's the button click. The target, that's going to be the button. And then we're going to go into the class. Let's see, list. And we're going to add the selected class, like so. Let's see if that works. I just clicked that element here. Selected. And now we see I can't add selected to another one because we already have one selected. So let's see. We have our buttons here. None of them have the selected class. If I click this one, we see that selected is added. If I click another one, we can't select multiple buttons. That's what we've been doing here. Then I can actually, since we already have our count here defined in our JavaScript, I can actually call it here. I can say, let's see, count. And we see that it shows up as 0. Used Pokemon IDs, 27. Great. And watch now, if I say in our function here, we are gonna increment count plus plus, that just increases it by 1. And then we're gonna initialize a new variable as well. We're gonna call it total count, or actually no, we have that. That's our DOM element here. We are gonna say total count text content equals count. So now this element here, the 0, should increase by 1, and it has. And then we can't press another button because then we've already kind of used up this question here. So that's working. Then we are gonna have to actually display the correct result. So we're gonna create a new function here, and that is gonna be in our utility functions. That's going to be step 15.5, is it? I believe so. This is going to be a function to update the result text and class name. And it's going to be an easy function. I'm going to say display result. It's going to take result. And we're going to go into the result element. We are going to go into the text content, and then we are going to equals that to the result that we sent in. And that is all for that function. Then we can scroll up to our check answer function, and inside of here, we are going to ask if is correct. So basically, if we've hit the correct answer. And inside of here, we want to display the result, and we want to give it a string correct answer, because that's the result we are sending in. So if we click now Diglett, that should be the correct one. Correct answer. Perfect. And we don't want to just give it the correct answer. We also want to let's see, we want to increment. If correct, increase the points by 1. So we're going to take the points, we're going to increment them like that. We are going to take the points element dot text content and set that to equals points. So now we should have both the count, which is the last 0, and the points, the first, to increase. If we hit the correct one, let's check. Weedle, not a number. That is pretty normal because we probably haven't initialized points yet. Let points in the top here. We're also going to set that to 0. And now if we try again, let's see, scroll back down first. That's Bellsprout, 1 out of 1. And if we hit, well, now we played, we don't have a way to play the next part yet. Let's answer wrong here. It's not Pharaoh. Yeah, then the amount of count we have had is increasing, but the amount of points we have is not. So it's working. Then we also want to go into the event target, aka the button we just clicked, and into the class list and add a class of correct, which is gonna style it as we had made here in the style sheet. Let's see, button correct, background color should be button correct and should be green. So if we click now, let's see, is that gloom? Green, of course. So that's for the correct answer. So if correct, that's what happens. But then we also need else, an else statement here, which if it's not correct, it's incorrect, it's wrong. So then let's also take and copy this here. And we are going to actually, that's not what we need. We need the display result. And we need to say wrong answer. And we're not going to scream that at people. We're just going to say ... And then we are going to add the class wrong. So this is Ratata, pretty sure. And if we say Bulbasaur, it's red. And we get a wrong answer up here. Perfect. Then we add 15.9 here. We're going to load the next question with a 1 second delay for the user to read the result. You can increase this if you want, because it is a bit fast. And we are going to load the next question with the set timeout. And then we're going to use a arrow function here. And we're going to say show loading. And we're going to set that to true. And that is another variable that we are going to initialize now. So let show loading. And initially that is going to be false. Lower capital, like so. So show loading, we're setting that to true because we are loading the next question. And then we are going to call load question with options again. But first after 1,000 milliseconds. So load question with options is this first async function that we made, which is calling the, let's see, check answer here whenever we click something. So when we click something, the whole first function, load questions, is repeating through the same steps. So let's check if that works. So now we've refreshed. And let's say matchup. We're loading and getting a whole new set of Pokemon. And we see that we are getting our points when we are clicking the correct ones. Our points are increasing. When we are clicking the wrong ones, only the amount of tries is increasing. And the styling is updating, as well as the text up top here. So now we can scroll back up to, let's see, this part here, part 14. And that is where we were calling our check answer function. And then we appended our all the buttons here. Now we can move on to part 16. So if, let's scroll all the way up here, if we have show loading, if it is, it's starting at false, but when we are fetching a Pokemon, before actually doing all this fetching here, we want to set that to true, because then we are loading before we get the actual data. Then we're going to scroll down as well to the load question with options here. We are also going to have an if statement here, where we are going to ask if show loading is true. We are going to say show loading window, which is a function we're going to call, and we're going to hide puzzle window, which is another function we're going to call. And these functions are going to decide if the loading image is going to be displayed or if the rest of the quiz is going to be displayed. So when we are loading the initial time, if the loading is true, only show the loading, else only show the quiz. That's what these two functions are going to be doing. And then we can scroll down to our number 10 here. So before we shuffle this array, we are going to add another if statement inside of the function here, like so. So if options dot length is equal to 4, we are gonna also show loading equals to false, like so. This essentially means that turn off loading if all options have been fetched. Because if we fetched all the options, it means that all the async processes have been completed. So now we can turn off the loading and show the actual images because we have them now. Then we should be able to control the loading and switch between them as we want. We now just have to actually add the classes that are going to hide each elements. So if we scroll back down here, we're going to go down to our utility functions, and we are going to create number 17, and that is going to be the hide loading. So that's going to be hide function hide loading window, like so. And we're going to target the loading container dot class list dot add the hide class. And if you can remember here, up here in our, just after we append the child here, we are gonna actually call another if statement here. If show loading is false, then we want to hide loading window, and we want to show, let's see, not loading window, but puzzle window. And there we go. Those are the two next functions we are also going to be creating. So now let's scroll down. Hide loading window. We're simply just going to hide the loading window, add a hide class, and the hide class, as we can see here. Where do we have it? Did we forget to create it? Maybe we did indeed. Let's add those now. Show is going to be display flex, and hide is going to be display none, like so. And now we can see that when we are loading and the loading screen goes away, it is actually being hidden. The next one is going to be show loading window function show loading window. I'm going to target the loading container, go into its class list, add, and it's going to be show. We are also going to, let's target this one. Before we show it, we are going to remove the hide, so we don't have like both classes overlapping each other. And then we are also going to go into the main container. Oops, we have spelled that wrong, I see. Main container. Let's just make that O lowercase, like so. We're going to go into the main container. We're going to go into the first element. If I open the HTML here, that's the container. Document get element by ID container. So that's basically everything inside of there. We're going to go into the class list and we are going to remove the show class. Then we are going to target. Next one, we are going to say show puzzle window function, show puzzle window. And these are basically pretty similar. Let's target, copy paste that. And we're going to go into not the main container, but the loading container. Remove show, and then we're going to go not into the loading container, but the main container for the two next ones. And the same thing, remove hide, add show. We have a little error here, we're going to fix that. And for the last one, 20 hide puzzle window. It might actually just be because we don't have this function yet. Hide. Let's see, hide puzzle window. And here we're going to go into the main container, into the 0th element, class list, add hide. Same here, we forgot to add 0 here and 0 here. And to remove the 0 there, that's what happens when you copy paste. So we have an error here. Show puzzle window. Let's see, show puzzle window. Are we doing something not so good here? Remove show, that's correct. Main container, class list, remove hide, and add show. It looks to be correct. Where are we using it? Show puzzle window, it seems to be good. Let's open up this project again, like so. We still have an uncaught in promise. Cannot read properties of null, reading 0. Add show puzzle window. Let's first check if everything is working before we go and solve this bug. So now we are loading our app for the first time. We are getting a Pokemon. Let's say we are good. We say Wartortle. Group correct answer. We are receiving that. And nothing is happening. Now we are getting somewhere. Cannot read properties of null. Reading 0. So let's open up. Have we initialized everything? We seem to have done that. So if we go to the script, we see line 99 here. 99, show puzzle window. Yep. So it seems to be this one. We go here, show puzzle window. Let's just comment out this. And things seem to be working then. Uncaught in promise, type error, cannot read properties of null, reading 0. Okay. I wonder if we have defined something wrong. Let's see, in our DOM elements here, result element, it's probably something I changed the options container. Options container. Ah, there we go. I think, no. It's not that. Result element. You might be seeing this. Let's see, options container, points element, total count, main container, loading container, total count, points value, options. Ah, okay, I see what's going on here. We are not targeting the main container correctly. That's why this 0 is showing up so weirdly. So if we go to our elements here, container, we see it's not an ID, it's a class. So we are trying to get a hold of it by an ID name. Once in fact we should be using let's see, get element by class name. Hit save, and that should do the trick. Let's see. If we console log, or we just print main container, there we go, main container, and then the first element here, div container show. It seems like the error is gone. Let's try to play the game now. So if I take the correct answer, we are loading a new one. Correct answer again. Who's that Pokemon? Arcanine, wrong answer. Who's that Pokemon? Wrong answer. Who's that Pokemon? Horsey. We see our points are increasing. That is Onyx. Cool. We are getting random Pokemons. They're being displayed. We have our hover effect. We have our two ways of indicating if we have a correct or wrong answer. Points are being updated, and new Pokemons are being fetched, and the quiz and loading screen are changing if they are being shown or not. And now we are going to put this amazing project on the web for the world to see. So you're going to go ahead and just save everything here. Then you're going to go to netlify.com. You're going to log in or sign up if you don't have an account. And then we are going to add a new site clicking this button here. We are going to deploy manually. And here we're simply going to drag our whole folder into this Netlify here. And this should take pretty low amount of time because it's a small project. Here we see that it's complete. And now if we go to site overview here and we click this little link, we see that our project is done. We have a URL, we have a link we can share. And this is a great project to have on your portfolio to showcase your ability to work with asynchronous code and also to gather some extra points for the Pokemon nerds out there from potentially the same generation as me. If you like this video, then I have another video here for you suggested. And until next time, see ya.